Okay. Time for another Raw Reflections where I, as a conservative Southern Christian, am going through a liberal graduate program in a liberal state. Last week, we talked about my week 5 class where in my foundations of sexuality, we covered sexual health and well being, and I'm going to be real honest, like, I felt like that class week was like the calm before the storm. Like, I was more underwhelmed by that material than I previously had been, coming off that high from like the anatomy week. But this week, we are talking about how sex relates to technology and media. Pardon me. And so we're going to go kind of out of order from the usual way I cover the week, just because there's more information in the less typical places. The lecture that my professor went over um, really talked about how sexual aids are technically classified as more low tech, but gradually getting more high tech devices. And there, I know in previous weeks I have discussed how I had to review for like a current events journal about how there are more like long distance, um, like partner use devices, like if partners are on a business trip or like live states away from each other, there is something, the term, funnily enough, I heard on a YouTube video, because even in my spare time I am listening to like lectures and sex educators talk about sex. It's called teledildonics, and it sounds kind of like what you think it would be, tele, as in like being able to cross distance with the use of like computers and the internet, and dildonics, being able to use sexual pleasure devices. But um, my professor works in the Mayo Clinic also. And so she does a lot of work with people who are going through menopause or have other sexual dysfunctions and disorders. And so they tend to look at sexual pleasure devices actually as medical devices. And so we had this whole really great conversation about how if someone is having a sexual dysfunction that they're coming to you for, and they kind of balk at the idea of using what they consider to be a sex toy, then don't of course don't push it on them, don't force it on them, but like explore that idea with them first of like, oh, you seem to be kind of bothered by the idea of a sex toy. Like, could you explain to me where that comes from so that I can understand what's going on? Um, because often what people get really kind of uptight about with sex toys is that um, they haven't really examined what their actual issue is with it. I know that in the evangelical community, there are uh, huge swaths of the Christian community that are totally against any type of sexual pleasure device, no matter the situation. And I think it's more nuanced than that. I don't think sex toys are inherently bad. There are some that are prescribed to people for tightening pelvic floor muscles, and which can be a huge issue. Uh, having having loose pelvic floor muscles can cause like female like urinary incontinence, where like, if a woman coughs, she might pee on herself a little bit. And you can actually do exercises with what some people classify as a sex toy to tighten your pelvic floor muscles. And that is not inherently sexual in nature. And so, in that instance, I would not view it as a sex toy. Um, and my professor kind of touched on that. She said, there are sometimes people who are paraplegics or quadriplegics that might need sex toys to help uh, kind of prepare them for sexual intercourse, to get like the blood flowing and the sensation, because sometimes they might have low sensitivity in those areas to begin with. She said that also when women go through menopause, they lose a lot of like blood flow and circulation, and there's more dryness than there may have previously been. And she said, so uh, lots of times doctors and therapists will prescribe sex toys to be used to kind of like get the blood flow going and use it with a partner, and in those situations they should be viewed as medical devices because they are having a positive physical medical benefit for that person and their partner. And so I thought that was such a strong point that she made. Um, and interestingly enough, like with my husband has a bachelor's and a master's in religion, and like his specific areas are apologetics, theology, church history. Like he is crazy smart, and he is actually like 2/3 done with his PhD in Bible exposition. So with him having a super religion based background, and with me having a more psychological, therapeutic, and now like a sexual health background, we have so many cool conversations where we talk about like, okay, so this is what I have learned sexually speaking. And he's like, "Oh, well, how do you reconcile that with this? Like part of the faith that I know that you have and you are consistent with and you live out, and you have strong moral and religious values. So like, how do you make those two things fit?" And we have a lot of really cool ideological conversations in our house, and we are big nerds. And one of those is actually sex toys. We have had several conversations about them because he and I have talked about that like as an idea and a concept, because we seek to understand. Um, and I have communicated to him that like I feel like they're not inherently bad, and so why would people think that they are bad? And we came kind of to the conclusion that I I am correct. Like they inherently are not bad, because pleasure is not inherently bad. What is bad and what becomes sinful that the Bible talks about is like what are your intentions, like what are your thoughts, like people who engage in self-pleasure, like orgasms are a biological response, and God gave us that ability, but it's how we go about it. And if we're doing it with our spouse, that's totally okay. If we are doing it by ourselves, that's totally okay. But what are we thinking in our mind? What are we watching? What are we reading? Like, what are we doing to give us those feelings of pleasure? And and so we talked about how like self-stimulation and sex toys are okay, but like if you have to watch porn to get aroused and then self-stimulate, bad, sinful. So it really kind of matters what those details are. They say the devil's in the details, and that's exactly why. So if someone has an issue with a sex toy, like we we're really just kind of taught to investigate the bias. And if someone has some like major religious hang up, as a future sex therapist, I would love to investigate that with them, because as a Christian who has had the forethought and the conversations with more ministerial personnel and pastors, I would love to try to have that conversation with them in a safe space. So I thought that was really cool, and I benefited so much just even from that lecture that we had on a Monday. Um, so the next thing we're going to talk about is the assignment. I've been telling y'all that we've been working on a project this whole time. My project that I went with, I believe I told y'all last week, was ADHD and its effects on sexual encounters. Well, this week our assignment was to peer review other people's. And so I was assigned two people's final projects to review. And the first one was a special education teacher of like a high school age life skills classroom somewhere up north. And his project was about how, pardon me, it was about how life skills students needed sex ed. And I totally support that. I think it was great. His project was great. It really covered like a multidisciplinary approach. And I think that's so important. You have to get parents on board. You have to get teachers on board, other therapists that a kid may have, to really reinforce those concepts from all angles, because special needs kids and teens, these aren't kids by high school age, they're closer to adulthood, they can really develop some socially inappropriate sexual behaviors. And if you don't give them the necessary information and they graduate from high school, once they go out into the community, there could be legal ramifications. And so I feel like our society would be remiss not to teach kids with disabilities sex education. And also, people tend to infantilize special needs kids, but I have seen and spoken with and worked with in counseling some of those life skills classified teens, and they can curse, they can break laws, they can read, they can write. There is no reason to treat them like a baby. In my 10 plus years in education, I have seen SPED kids have, frankly, more often than not, have more sex than gen ed kids. And so they definitely need to be educated. They need to understand the consequences of their behaviors. And so I thought his project was so great. I didn't have any major notes for him other than some of the data he was using was kind of old. And if there was newer data, that would be awesome. And the second person was a non-educator. I think she was a sex educator already, like in real life. But she kind of went through the history of OnlyFans, and it was really interesting to learn about, and like so insightful. I am not by any means like pro OnlyFans. Like, do not misunderstand, because I know OnlyFans at the end of the day is used in a more pornographic nature. People are paying sex workers to, find sexual pleasure. And so I did think it was cool that like I didn't know it had been around years before it became really popular. And I had learned about it a couple weeks before now, and the sense that like it is a more sort of like ethical porn option because it doesn't misuse and mistreat the performers because they are in total control of their product and they get 100% of like their profits back after they, pay the OnlyFans account for like their like third party percentage. Um, but also lots of people, I have never been to the OnlyFans site. I have no desire. Like I would be mortified if like that came up in my search history. So I just don't. I didn't even I haven't been brave enough to like Google it for curiosity's sake. Because I'm not above that. I have downloaded and Googled some things just to try to understand it better. But OnlyFans has not made that to the top of my curiosity list or anything. Um, but one thing I did want to point out to people and really just kind of remind myself of is that sex workers are not explicitly sexual. Like there are people on OnlyFans who sell feet pictures. I have heard of people selling like dirty socks and like hair bands and I mean those things people are not exposing themselves. I know that that's what we want to think when we hear about things like OnlyFans, but it it has become such a larger like umbrella term, this like concept of a sex worker, and I am not saying that that somehow makes it more appropriate. That really is just speaking to the fact that our world is more and more broken, that we are kind of perverting non sexual things like feet and hands and, you know, I, because to me, sorry, there's nothing sexy about a sock. And I don't understand necessarily the thought process personally. I mean, I've heard the argument from someone, and so I know academically how they get from sock to sexual pleasure, but um, it just is showing me how broken the world is. But just because someone is a sex worker does not mean that they are showing their body or having sex for money. And I think that that's something that the conservative community and the religious community needs to understand, because we hear sex worker and we tend to jump straight to like prostitute, stripper, pornography, and that's not necessarily the case. So it it would benefit us to ask more questions and seek to understand and not just pass judgment. Let's see. The next thing, was the current event journal. And of course, for the current event journal, I will share that link in the description because our current event journals are just things that have happened in the past year that have made it to the news that are sexual in nature. And this one I found super interesting because they gathered their research and did surveys in North Texas, on college campuses in North Texas, and the University of North Texas being one of those college campuses. Um, so, this article said that the U.S. has one of the highest prevalences of STIs for high income countries, with the most like problem age range being like 20 to 34, 35. So, like college age to young adult, because nowadays 33 is not considered that well of an established adult. Like early 30s people are still kind of trying to figure it out. We're struggling longer out of college than our parents did. Um, So, in half of Americans under 30 report that they have used a dating app or are currently using a dating app. And so they really tried to gather data and statistics to compare risky sexual behaviors and the use of dating apps because they're kind of seeing what could be a correlation between the two. And so I want to make sure that I'm listing this off correctly. A link between certain riskier sexual behaviors and those that use dating apps. So here are the riskier behaviors: having more than one partner, and what they mean is more than one partner, like at a time. Like you might sleep with someone one week and someone different like a week or two later. Mixing sex and alcohol, STI screeners, younger age of first encounter, so younger sexual activity, and the frequency of condoms being present during anal sex. That one struck me the weirdest. Like I would have never thought to look for that specific thing. Um, but ultimately, the article concluded that dating apps and risky behaviors are mutually reinforcing, which just means that one encourages the other. So, dating apps reinforce risky behaviors, and risky behaviors encourage people on dating apps because dating apps give people easier access for casual hookups and more of the riskier behaviors that were discussed. And those already prone to risky behaviors could also be more prone to dating apps because like it's they don't consider it as risky compared to the things that they're already into, meeting a potential stranger for a date or a hookup. Let's see. And then they threw in a couple lines about to combat the present trend, apps like dating and hookup apps should try to integrate like sexual health education to I don't know, like slip it in and sneakily be providing sex ed to these people. Remind people to get screeners as they have hookups with people, and apps should consider like integrating in like an exposure notification. Like if someone using the app realized that they contracted an STI, if they notified the app, then the app could like send out a notification of like, hey, someone that you recently matched with uh, contracted an STI, like maybe you should go get tested, which I think that'd be a really cool feature. I and I say that I have never used a dating app. My husband has never used a dating app. We met each other in 2007 and we dated on and off until 2012, and we have been joined at the hip ever since. That is our sophomore year homecoming photo behind me. So, and I think I saw my first iPhone when I was a junior in high school. So I am so elderly. I am pre internet and definitely pre dating app. So I'm saying all of this as someone who has never used a dating app, and I don't really know people and like discuss with people a whole lot who do use dating apps. Um, I am at the elderly age of 33, where a lot of mine and my husband's friends are getting divorced, unfortunately. Um, but they are having to kind of get back out there and figure out this new dating world that consists of dating apps. And so I'm glad that I'm not in the position where I have to figure that out, but this is good, relevant information. Um, I for the first time, like I have had a perfect score in this class up until now. I actually got dinged for this very first thing, because my professor did not like my analysis of like, well, this is kind of like a which came first, the chicken or the egg. Like this, like was a person more prone to engaging in risky behavior before the app or after the app? And they, I guess, did not like the conclusions I was drawing because I'm definitely more conservative than my professor. Um, but they only counted off like a couple points. And at the end of the day, like, I am entitled to my opinion and I am entitled to my analysis. And I think that's why she only counted off a couple points. Um, but I did remark on being rather surprised by the risky behavior that they were measuring, of like a that the risky behavior was that someone might be engaging in anal sex without a condom. And I straight up said, like, I thought that was odd because I classify having anal sex as a risky behavior with or without a condom, because that, I mean, it is a riskier behavior because there are different bacteria. The rectum is not built for that activity. That is not like its express purpose. And so I just think she was not happy with me just overall because of that. But that is her own problem. They also gave some like weird statistics in the middle of that, and I made sure to point that out. Um, they talked about the demographics. Sorry, and I'm looking at my notes. They talked about the demographics, implying that the people who use the dating apps are more likely to be white, male, and heterosexual. And I said this could so easily be sample bias. Like I have a bachelor's of science, that required a lot of like research based classes and science classes because I was pre nursing for half of undergrad, and I was saying that is sample bias. Like, who did you think you were going to be surveying in North Texas? Like, white straight men, obviously. Um, and so I was like, I mean, if this would have been done in California, we might have gotten some different data. Um, but then I also made a point to question, like, if we're considered one of the highest rated for STIs in high income countries, what other countries were on the list, and what did the data look like? Because they didn't share the data, they didn't link the data. Um, and like, I want to know where we rank compared to other countries, because there apparently are other high income countries. Because I assume if we were the highest income country, then they would have said that in the article, but they didn't. And so I just am really curious to see what that ranking looks like. And now that I have rambled terribly, let's discuss my discussion boards. Discuss my discussion boards. Um, so the readings were what I was supposed to discuss in my discussion boards, which is why I kind of skipped over that after talking about my lecture, because I'm essentially about to review the readings that I liked the best anyway. Um, I will say there were a lot of articles about porn, and because this class is doing a really big push on like de-vilifying the concept of porn. And I mean, if you are a Bible believing Christian, then it should not matter about this other stuff that I'm about to say, because in the Bible, it explicitly states that porneia, any type, is a sin, and we should not be engaging in it. We should not be engaging with it. And so I don't care what flavor or variety or category that someone is trying to sell to me. The concept in and of itself is sinful and wrong. But if you want to argue about the details of it, porn has made a more positive trajectory in the sense that in recent years, it has consciously tried to become more romanticized and like relationship based, to try to entice female viewers as well as male. It has become less violent and non-consensual looking and rough. And that's just based on the media articles and the research articles that I have read. But at the end of the day, like, porn is still porn, no matter how you want to shade it. But it was very obvious that they were trying to kind of rewrite the narrative and make it more palatable this week. We also talked about sexual emojis, the concept of porn and sex addiction, and sex dolls, violence, and pedophiles. So, I did a lot of picking and choosing. I really stuck with, I read one article called Porn Sex versus Real Sex, and it talked about the difference between the two and how porn sex affected real sex. And in this article, it talked about how we as a society are conditioned to believe that porn sex has nothing but negative side effects on us as people, and it negatively affects our sexual relationships, which, like I have already said, I absolutely believe it does. There have I am an addictions counselor. I'm a licensed counselor, and I have done plenty of research and projects and stuff when I took my addictions class for like my clinical therapy graduate classes. And it does. It ruins marriages, and it can have effects on you in the bedroom if you consume too much of it. And it has the same like addictive connections in the brain as drugs. And because it can affect your daily life, because it can affect your relationships with loved ones, it absolutely has negative side effects. And so I don't let anyone tell you otherwise. And this article tried to do a pretty good job of that and like plead its case for like the positive effects that it can have. And I didn't argue that in my discussion board just because I knew it would not be received well, and I was just trying to get through it. But so I did point out that it made a point to say that, we're all negatively conditioned to believe that like it's all bad and it's only bad, and it sexually explicit materials, which is the scientific description of porn, produce negative results such as male violence, body insecurity, and unrealistic expectations, which is all true. Like, I was a teenager not that long ago, and I can attest to all three of those. I have seen those in male peers. Let's see. Oh, and I also discussed how two of my current event journals previously proliferated that concept, just to point out that there's been plenty of news that supports this idea. Um, but then I just said, oh, it's good to see that there are some people who are, doing neutral research, because research is always best done when you don't start out with an agenda. Like if you're starting out research with pure curiosity of like, oh, I wonder if there's a connection between A and B. I wonder if these things have anything to do with each other. I wonder what would happen if. That is good, neutral, unbiased research. But going in to research, trying to prove like that there is a link between this specific thing and this specific thing, or going in wanting to disprove something, makes you more naturally biased towards that outcome. It can affect how you conduct your research and gather your data. And some researchers are pleasantly surprised, like when they think they know what's going to happen and they're totally wrong because they didn't let it affect their research. But I mean, it's not a good idea to go about it that way, because your bias can be subconscious sometimes and it can be so strong. Um, but what they said was that individuals who regularly partook in sexually explicit materials predicted more accurate knowledge of anatomy, physiology, and sexual behavior. And I mean, of like, that's not a very good argument, in my opinion. um, because like you can get those understandings from places other than sexually explicit materials, but like anatomy, duh, like you're seeing a naked person. Of course you have a better concept of anatomy. I to me that was a pretty lackluster argument. Um but so the I did not read initially the article about sex dolls, but after seeing so many of my classmates read it, and like they got wild about it. Like some people were super up in arms. And they were saying that like, oh, these sex dolls could promote like violence towards women and violence towards children, and it could encourage pedophiles. And I was like, what in the world are we talking about? That is wild to me, y'all. Um, and so I did go back and look at it a little bit. And so once I read it, I wasn't too shocked. They were just really extrapolating out the information and like taking it to what they felt like was the logical end. Um, but with ChatGPT and AI and stuff, that stuff totally made sense to me, because there have been a ton of movies here recently, um, like the movie Her. There was just one in theaters called Companion. Uh, I remember there was one called Lars and the Real Girl. And I even had a classmate talk about a Netflix series called, I want to say Black Mirror, but that might not be exactly right. Um, where these, it's always men, have these female like sex robots or AI or whatever. Um, and my husband and I were recently talking about how we have seen lots of teenagers specifically. Um, you can build like an AI girlfriend online, and uh, my husband says that he knows a couple teenagers that have been like haha joking, kind of playing around with it according to them. I don't think they're joking. Um, And he has asked them, like, what's the deal? What's the attraction to this? Like, why not go spend all your time and effort on like a real living, breathing human being? And it was so wild for him to tell me their kind of justification. They're like, oh, I get to pick what she looks like and what she sounds like, and I don't have to worry about her not liking me because we get to talk about whatever I want to talk about whenever I want to talk about it. And it's like, ultimately, it just was uncomfortable to hear because it sounded so self absorbed and egocentric. But also at the same time, like, I know that these kids are probably not kids who can get a real living and breathing girlfriend at this phase in their life because they are a little odd or like don't have the social skills or are late bloomers. And it was weird that they would rather have full control over another person than go out and like try to deal with a complex, complicated, living, breathing human being that won't worship the ground they walk on and may disagree with them. Um, and I had a classmate respond to that and say, oh, well, they, like, it could be a safe place, like these VR, like virtual relationships could be a safe place for them to like experiment. And I was like, well, that's dangerous because fantasy is not reality. There are plenty of things that like we might fantasize about or like conceptualize, but in reality, it's not possible, not doable. And thinking that it's as easy as like making the shift from like virtual reality to actual reality is is such a slippery, messy slope. And so I would hate for kids to think that they are living their dream in their little VR headsets and them just think that reality is not worth it. Because imagine if that got taken away, the depression that they would experience and the consequences of that. It really is just putting more kids in therapy, in my opinion. Um, oh, but then I also wrote about sexual emojis. Um, let's see. There, of course, was a correlation between people who used sexual emojis and identified themselves as having extroverted behavior, and um, those with the extroverted behavior and higher prevalence of sexual emojis also had a higher number of sexual partners. Um, because, in my opinion, you have to be like a pretty confident person to like even text in words like something sexually explicit, um, let alone like putting it in an emoji. That's really putting yourself out there, and so you've got to be like pretty sure of yourself to do something like that. Um, and this could totally just be, once again, me being an absolute millennial about this, like an elder millennial, because I mean, I've been married for almost 10 years. I have been with my husband for a long time, pre technology. That has never been something that we have had to deal with. And we are also very plain spoken. And he and I are both of the opinion that, like, if you can't talk about it with someone to their face and you can't say the words, then you have no business doing it. You have no business like trying to express it in any other form of like media or communication. Like, I know writing is easier, but if you're trying to do something sexual or sexually explicit, then you should have the type of trusting, loving, like non-judgmental and open relationship with your partner that you can be vulnerable and look them in the eyes and say it. So I might just be super old school about it. Sorry. Um, let's see. There were some surprising details. Um, Women were more frequent users of a sexual emoji compared to men. Um, and thinking about that further, it might just be because women would prefer to use pictures instead of like literally spell it out, because women have always been conditioned to be like demure and pure and all of those things. And so maybe they can justify that easier in their minds of like, oh well, I'm not being vulgar and like spelling it out. It's kind of like a cute little guessing game, and emojis are these cute little pictures, and they're very cutesy and precious and colorful. Even like the little naughty like combinations of things still look kind of cutesy until you figure out what they're communicating, and you're like, oh gosh, could have gone my whole life without that. Thank you. Um, let's see. Yeah, I was thinking that they were trying to be like subtle and like less aggressive about it. Um, Maybe emojis like come off as more flirtatious. Let's see. Let's see. Leaning on them in favor of work. Yeah. We seem to be more and more as a society moving back towards emojis. And my husband jokes that like we're moving closer and closer to reverting to hieroglyphics every day. He is a smart aleck, obviously, but he's not totally wrong. Not that I'll ever say that to his face. Um, but one thing that wasn't part of my schoolwork and my research was when I was reading through my classmates' discussion boards trying to find people to reply to. They were talking a lot about how some of those articles were arguing against sex addiction and porn addiction being valid forms of addiction. And that to me was wild. I assumed that these liberal people and these liberal groups would be like so inclusive and like, oh yeah, absolutely. Come one, come all. Everyone is a victim. Everyone come like share your brand of suffering. We will accept you. Um, and so I was caught off guard. So I had to like really dig into what people were saying. And ultimately, they don't think that sex and porn addictions are as valid as other forms because they think that it is ultimately a choice that someone is making, that and they just don't like the consequences. And they like porn addiction specifically, they think that that is a construct of like the evangelical, like more morally conservative and restrictive society has constructed. And be, because they think that the majority of people who will identify as having those types of addictions are the more conservative groups of people, because they inherently view sex and porn usage as negative. And that was so interesting to me. And it makes total sense. Like, I ultimately don't agree with it, But like I like the concept makes sense because like people who have lower moral thresholds and people who aren't religious, they don't see porn as an issue. They don't see it as sinful. And so they don't see watching it as a bad thing. They just see it as like an option. And some people do it, some people don't. And the people that view it as sin just have a hang up about it. And so they are not categorizing it as taboo, and therefore their mind isn't like creating this like naughtiness of it in their mind. And so they're just like using it like a tool and moving on. And so they were discussing how like they're less likely to get addicted to it, whereas someone who views it as sinful to engage in one time and has created this like taboo space for it, um, they're the ones who are putting this barrier on their own minds and going, oh, I shouldn't be doing this. It's bad. It's wrong. And it makes them more likely to be enticed by the concept of this like naughty thing. And so they keep going back. And that's why it's having such negative repercussions on their life. And that if they would just not categorize it as what it is, which is sin, then it wouldn't have such a stranglehold on them. And I was like, oh my gosh, that is so true. That doesn't make it wrong. It's, I mean, like, we shouldn't be declassifying it as sin. It is sin. But that's why, is they view it as so commonplace that it's not a problem worth talking about. And we're giving it the names that it deserves. Like we're approaching it with fear and disdain and treating it as taboo because it is, because that's not appropriate. But it just was so interesting to see their explanation and like how they like thought through it in their mind. And they did that for sex addiction too. Um, pardon. And I had to actually respond to one of my classmates because, and I'm trying to look it up on my audiobooks because I have a bunch of like therapy audiobooks. There was an audiobook that I recommended to one of my classmates because I was like, this, I wouldn't have said sex addiction held any value and like should even be part of the conversation. I also at one point was like, there is no way. That is just something that men who are serial cheaters say to try to like victimize themselves. Let's see. But there was this book. It is called Silently Seduced: When Parents Make Their Children Partners. And that makes it sound like super sketchy. It really is a book. And let's see, who is it by? Does it say? By Kenneth Adams. Silently Seduced by Kenneth Adams. I listened to it on audiobook. It talked about how, like, if parents get divorced and they have children, it's pretty common for a parent to make, like, one of the older children, like, they just bring them up into the role of, like, spouse, in the sense that they start treating them like an adult and they involve them in conversations that they have no business involving their children in, like about their ex or about finances or about, taking care of the other kids. And it becomes what the author of this book referred to as emotional incest. And I was not seeing the connection until the end of the book when they started explicitly connecting it to sex addiction, where this like emotional incest and this parent treating them as a kid like an equal partner, how that could play out and create this kind of perfect storm for sex addiction to take place. And the psychology behind it was super interesting. I honestly need to give it another listen. Um, because ultimately, while I still think sex addiction is a bit of a cop out, I am much more willing to listen to someone's argument on it than I was before I read this book. Um, but from that, the person who I was speaking to in my discussion was an attorney who prosecuted sex crimes. And so she is so cool. Like, she is like so put together and so intelligent. And I mean, just fearless and well spoken and confident. And her question to our professor this week was, she was using her lawyer speak, and she was talking about prosecuting perpetrators and pedophiles and things like that. Um, and oh, I gotta pardon me. And I'm doing all the things, like coughing and sneezing all over the place today. Um, and so our professor, like, y'all, it made me sick, to be honest. Um, because I was tracking with this attorney that was asking the question, and our professor came back and used totally different language, very woke language. And I knew that my professor was liberal, but there's a difference between being liberal and being woke. Um, because where my classmate used the term pedophile, my professor used the term minor attracted person. And I was like, no, no, mm-mm, no, ma'am. You said that like they aren't committing a crime, like these people are not absolutely sick. Um, and so one thing of use that she did say was that pedophiles are people attracted to younger minors, and a hebophile with a B. Hebophile was attracted to the more like adolescent age group, like still minors, but like the like 11, 12 and up. Um, oh, y'all, it makes me sick to think about it. Um, because the classmate was saying that like not all pedophiles sexually assault, and not all people who sexually assault are pedophiles. I don't know. It felt like the square rectangle rule is what she was kind of trying to like piece apart. Um, but my professor gave a resource of this documentary called I, Pedophile, kind of like the movie I, Robot. Um, it was called I, Pedophile, and it was on Tubi for free. The, Tubi, like that, like free kind of streaming service for like super like fringe documentaries and TV shows. And I was like, what is this? And I was like, let me just see what's going to happen. Because, like I said, I didn't dig too deep into the whole sex dolls debacle. Um, but some of my classmates were really riled up and sickened by that article and like straight up said so in the discussion boards. And they were saying that like this could encourage people to be more violent if they have a female sex doll that they can commit violence against and can commit rape against, then like the line between female sex doll and female person might be so thin in their mind. Like, y'all are thinking that this is going to stop them and it could just encourage them. And some people were making that same kind of argument with pedophiles and hebophiles, saying, like, what are the ethics and the morals behind, like, if, like, that is so distasteful and disgusting and repugnant to give someone a sex doll that looks like a child for a pedophile. And some people make the argument, not anyone in my class, but some people make the argument that if you give them the doll, that will keep them from harming a real child. And I I think that is treating the symptom and not the root. The root being sin. Ultimately, everyone who does not want to call sin a sin is treating the symptom, not the root. And I mean, I've told y'all before, that's why I practice CBT, because cognitive behavioral therapy is always interested in getting at the root of the issue and killing something at the root. But in good faith, because there have been things that I have been wrong about before in this class. No, I will not be linking this video, this documentary. Y'all can go find it yourselves. It was like an hour, and I thought, what damage could be done in an hour? Like, how sickened could they make me in an hour? And my gosh, it was like they took that as a challenge. It was these men, and including the person that made the video, the documentary. He is in it as a star. He himself identifies as a pedophile. Um, they, no blurred face, straight up said, I am a pedophile. I am attracted to children. I have never touched one, and they think they deserve a gold medal for that. And that is essentially what the documentary was like a whole victimhood campaign for pedophiles, and how like they are this down and out community that is mistreated. And I was telling my husband after I watched it that like I had to stop it several times. It made me ill to hear their thought process. And they would say things like, if I was an alcoholic and my buddy said, hey man, you want to go grab a beer? And I told him, oh no man, I can't. I'm a recovering alcoholic. Like, he would respect me for that. He would probably view me better for showing restraint. But if my buddy asks me to watch his kid and I say, oh, sorry man, I can't because I'm a pedophile, he would stop being friends with me. He would disown me. He would probably hate me, never want to speak to me again. And he's like, and there's no difference in the two. And I was thinking, yes, there is. That is wild for you to have done the mental gymnastics to think that those are the same, man. And this same guy talked about how he could just see a little girl walking down the street. And I'm like, oh, like, it honestly made me want to cry because I am so careful about what I post pictures of for my kid. And I send my family pictures, I send my husband's family pictures, and even when I send pictures to them, I'm always very careful about, like, you know, protecting my son, not because my not because our families are untrustworthy, but just because this world is untrustworthy. And to hear that pedophiles are to the point where they could be walking down the street fully clothed, it it made me sick because my child cannot speak. My child cannot advocate for himself. My child and other special needs kids are the most violated community. And to know that my son can just be minding his own business and even unknowingly become the victim of somebody like this, it broke my heart, and it made me so nervous. And although I haven't posted a picture of my kid in years on Facebook outside of like a family profile picture, like, it made me want to go rip every photo down. It was gross. But that reminds me of this other person who, he was like a highly decorated Marine, and he and his wife got married, couldn't have kids, so they started fostering kids, and they even adopted a son. And um, the man made it very clear, like, I've never touched my kid, I've never been, like, tempted to, I've never thought of him that way, but I was just having an urge one day, and I went into, wherever he kept his computer, and he looked at little boys in swimsuits, like, just swimming. And he said, like, a week later, the police showed up on his door and asked if he had been looking at things or if he had images on his computer. And he was honest and said yes. And they took his computer, and there were like 14 pictures on his computer out of like 25 or something like that he said were classified as criminal and got him in trouble. And they lost the ability to foster, and he was up in arms because he said that they also ultimately ended up having their adoption reversed, and they lost their child that they had adopted because of this whole scenario. And he was talking about how they're like 8 or 9 year old kid at this point, and his age range, it said name, age, what specific brand of pedophile he was in this documentary. And it said he was attracted to little boys like 7 to 11, and his adopted child was 8 or 9 years old. I, to me, that doesn't matter if you've said you've never been tempted. I mean, it is hard for me to even describe it to you without being grossed out. But and he just launched this whole like victimhood argument of like, when we adopted our son, like, we promised him that he would always have a home, we would always be his mom and dad, he would always have us, XYZ, and he got taken away for no reason. And I was thinking, no, you made those promises to him and you broke them. No one took him away from you. You got him taken away from you, because who in their right mind would put a child back in your home when he's not technically related to you? It's a child that you have unfettered access to. And, like, I just can't. Like, that's the demographic you claim to be attracted to. It's just wild. It's sickening. But they tried to draw this line between, it's a type of attraction, and we've never committed the crime. To me, that is a ticking time bomb. And they went into this whole discussion of how it's so hard for them to get therapeutic treatment and intervention until after they get caught. And I sympathize for that. I do. But I'm a pretty, hardened person, I feel like. And for it to have turned it's turning my stomach to talk about it right now. If I cannot sit here and talk about it in theory and in general, just reviewing what someone that I live nowhere near, have had no interaction with, is thinking and feeling on this topic, there's no way that I, as a therapist, could provide preventative therapy for this. I couldn't. And I'm sure many therapists feel the same way, because kids are just one thing that even criminals and people in prison, if someone has done something to a child, they will immediately target that person, because they might have killed 3 people, but they think you're a sicko for touching a kid. I mean, it just confuses. I mean, it doesn't confuse me. It's sin in their justification of their sinful actions, but practically, it just confuses me. One thing that that was actually positive that I got out of that documentary was there was the head researcher who studies pedophiles and the psychology of it. He does most of his research in Canada and Germany, because there are less repercussions for pedophiles who have not committed the act of pedophilia, who have the attraction but have not taken it into action, I guess is what you could say. They can come forward and discuss it more openly without repercussions compared to places like the U.S. Because the minute you say you're attracted to children, the United States will come down hard on you. And I'm sorry, I side with the government. If you're attracted to children, there are only so many times a child can walk by before you inevitably crack. And he discussed how there were some connections between people attracted to children, about how they have lower IQs, how they always ended up kind of being on the shorter end of male height. And I've always watched Law and Order SVU, and I think in those scenes where these people are oh, she was flirting with me, she was asking for it, and the detectives are she's a 7-year-old girl, she is a 4-year-old girl, you have lost your mind, you are sick, what were you thinking? And I genuinely am yeah, how do they justify that? they are wild for this belief that like they are flirting with them. Um, and the researcher created a really great analogy to help me like understand how they were coming up with that as like an excuse. And he was saying, you know, you and I, typical people, um, if we were single and we walked into a bar and we saw somebody that we were physically attracted to that was our type and we struck up a conversation, we would interpret their actions and their words as different types of flattery. And, you know, so if they like touched your hand, if they like flipped their hair, if they giggled or smiled or, you know, whatever, we would correctly interpret that as flirtation or interest. And a pedophile or a hebephile, but pedophiles especially, because they're wild. Um, Sorry, that wasn't a clinical opinion, because they are um, cognitively lower on average than someone who has appropriate attractions. Um, they are attracted to children, so they interpret the behavior of children as flirtation and interest, when developmentally speaking, that child is just being friendly. They are misinterpreting them like laughing and smiling and talking to them about toys and wanting to play with them and things like that. They are misinterpreting that child's actions as sexual advances and flirtation. And I was like, that that connection makes so much sense. It by no means justifies what they're doing, but like, okay, now I can connect A to B, so to say. Um, but it was, whew, it was wild. But then I also got to see one of the like interventions that Canada engages in with people who have already been like caught. And it had the classic trope of like, he was like a music teacher or something, and he was a part of the documentary, and I felt like this part was so beneficial too. Um, he explained what got him in trouble, um, that he was teaching a piano lesson, and he like was standing behind the girl at the piano who was like 10, 11, and he put his hand on her shoulder and kind of like rubbed her arm and made her uncomfortable. And so she went and told someone else at school, and he did end up getting in trouble and getting some kind of probation or like months long jail time or something, because it wasn't overtly sexual, but like the intention was there. Um, and so he was in this like community support group that offered like wraparound services. There were all of these like accountability partners and like police officers and therapists and people who had graduated the program that like were providing support so that this didn't happen again with him. And one of the activities that this like group went through, what, because he wasn't the only person in the group, it kind of reminded me of like AA but for low level pedophiles. And um, he and the other guys like described what they did, and then they would play the role of their victim, and someone else in the group would play their role. And he said that when he played the role of his victim, he said it really hit me in that moment that like I did not want this person's hand on my shoulder. I did not want their advance. It made me physically feel uncomfortable. And he said, and then when I put myself in the the developmental mind of an 11-year-old girl with the person behind me being my teacher, like I wouldn't have had the knowledge of like consent, and I would have been caught up in like the fact that they had more power over me. And he was like, I was so ashamed of myself, and I was so disgusted with myself and disappointed with myself. And I like it seemed to have been the description of like this light bulb kind of turning point moment for him. And I hope it was, considering he didn't explicitly do anything to traumatize, you know, for long term effects or anything like that. Um, but even if it wasn't, like that helped shed a lot of light for me, and I appreciated that. But oh my gosh, like I said, I am not going to link it, but if you would like to go look for it yourself, um, it is called I Pedophile, and like be be prepared for it to like wreck you, especially if you have children. Like I said, I'm a pretty hardened heifer, but it broke my heart when I thought about how unsafe my own child was just in being a child. Guys, I am so sorry. This is like twice the length of any video that it's supposed to be. So next week we are talking about the final week, week 7, and it will be over. Sorry, I'm looking at my notes. It will be over sexuality, religion, and law. I hate that that's the week 7 topic because, like, I wish we could have gone deeper into it in class. But I also will be separately linking my project. My project is 15 minutes in and of itself. So my next video will actually come out in 2 sets. My reflection and then my final project. Oh, sorry y'all. I had to do that rant because these people in my class were really not people in my class. To hear my professor speak so neutrally about that group of people just made me so angry and so sick at the same time. But that is why I'm going through this program, is because the Christian community needs someone to represent them. And the more representatives we have, the better. Like for me to be able to say, no, I know the language, I know the academics, I know the research, I have had to participate in all of it, and you are still wrong, I think is helpful and powerful for Christians. Anyway, I was about to go off again. Anyway, guys, I will see y'all next week for the final week of this first foundations class. Be sure to like, subscribe, do all the things that my husband says that I'm supposed to tell you to do. But in the meantime, bye.